The sun beat down hard on Willow Creek, Colorado, turning the dirt road into a river of dust and heat. Hannah Crawford stood in the middle of it, clutching the small hands of her 3 boys. The hem of her travel dress was torn and coated with dirt from the long road, and her bonnet hung limp from the weight of the miles behind her. She had come more than 300 miles since her husband's death, hoping for mercy from his kin. Instead, she'd been met at the door by her late husband's brother, who had looked her up and down with cold eyes and said, "We don't have room for a woman with 3 mouths to feed." Then the door shut in her face. Those words still echoed in her mind like a curse. Now she stood in a town she didn't know, with only $20 to her name and 3 hungry boys staring up at her. 8-year-old James tried to stand tall, pretending to be brave. 6-year-old Samuel's lip trembled, though he tried to hide it. 4-year-old William clung to her skirt, rubbing his eyes with a dirty fist. "Mama," James said softly, "where are we going to sleep tonight?" Quote. Hannah swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll find a place, darling. God provides." But as she looked around, her faith wavered. People passed without meeting her gaze, too busy, too proud, or too afraid to care. She guided her boys toward a wooden bench outside the general store and told them to sit. The sun was lowering, the shadows growing long. The stagecoach that had dropped them off was gone, its wheels already miles down the trail. She tried to gather her thoughts, smoothing her wrinkled dress, pretending composure she didn't feel. Her back straightened, her chin lifted. A lady, even a poor one, had her pride. "You folks look like you could use a hand," a voice said behind her. Hannah turned quickly. A tall man stood there, his hat shadowing steady eyes that studied her with quiet concern. His clothes were worn but clean. Brown vest, dusty boots, sun-tanned skin. The lines on his face told of both laughter and hard years. "We're just resting a moment," Hannah said, her voice careful. The man tipped his hat. "Name's Dawson Baxter. I run the Circle B ranch just outside town." Hannah hesitated, measuring him. "Hannah Crawford. These are my boys, James, Samuel, and William." Dawson crouched so he was eye level with the children. "That's quite a trip for young cowboys like you." His smile showed a small gap in his teeth. "Where are you folks heading?" Before she could answer, little William piped up, "Uncle Elijah don't want us. He says we eat too much." Hannah's cheeks flushed crimson. "William!" she scolded softly. Dawson's smile faded for a moment. He stood tall again, looking her straight in the eye. "Do you have a place to stay tonight, Mrs. Crawford?" "We'll manage," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "The hotel charges $2 a night," he said. "Boarding house is full of minors. And there's a storm coming from the west." He nodded toward the dark clouds building in the distance. "I've got a foreman's cabin sitting empty at my ranch. It's nothing fancy, but it's dry and warm." Hannah's first instinct was to refuse. A woman alone didn't accept invitations from strange men. But she wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a mother with 3 hungry sons. And those clouds were rolling fast. "I couldn't impose," she murmured. Dawson shook his head. "It's no trouble. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, would welcome the company. She's fond of children." He smiled gently. "And if you're willing to work, I could use an extra set of hands around the ranch." Hannah looked at her boys. They stared at her with pleading eyes. She felt the cold wind starting to rise, smelled the rain in it. "Very well, Mr. Baxter," she said softly. "We accept, for tonight." He nodded, as if he'd known she would. "My wagon's just down the road. We should leave before the storm hits." The ride took an hour. The boys sat wide-eyed in the wagon bed, asking questions faster than Dawson could answer. He didn't seem to mind, though. His voice stayed calm and patient, his eyes kind. Hannah watched him quietly, feeling a strange sense of safety she hadn't felt in months. "Are you married, Mr. Baxter?" Samuel asked innocently. Hannah gasped. "Samuel!" Dawson chuckled. "It's all right. No, son, I'm not married. Never found the time." When they crested the last hill, Hannah saw the Circle B ranch spread before them, A wide valley filled with grazing cattle, a big red barn, a sturdy main house, and cabins nestled under cottonwoods. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. "This is all yours?" she asked. Dawson nodded. "Built it from nothing. Started with 10 acres and 3 skinny cows 15 years ago." They stopped at a small cabin near the main house. Smoke curled from its chimney. "Here's the foreman's cabin," he said. "It's yours for as long as you need." Inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of stew and baking bread. Mrs. Abernathy, a plump, silver-haired woman, hurried forward. "You poor dears must be starving," she said, already ladling stew into bowls. Hannah stood frozen for a moment, watching her boys eat like they hadn't seen food in days. Gratitude and shame tangled in her chest. "Mr. Baxter," she said quietly, "I'll work for our keep. I won't take charity." Quote, he smiled, that small gap in his teeth showing again. "Didn't think you would, Mrs. Crawford. We'll talk in the morning." After Dawson left, Mrs. Abernathy helped Hannah settle the boys into bed. The cabin creaked softly under the rising wind. When the boys were asleep, the older woman spoke gently. "He's a good man, that one. Works harder than anyone I know. Fair and steady." Hannah nodded, her eyes misting. "He's been very kind." "Kind, yes, but don't mistake it for weakness. He expects honest work. You'll do fine here." When she was finally alone, Hannah sat by the window, listening to the rain begin to pound against the roof. Her reflection looked pale and tired, but the lines of fear that had carved her face for months seemed softer now. For the first time in a long while, her children slept safe, with full stomachs. She knelt beside the bed and whispered a prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for giving us one more chance." Quote, outside, the wind howled across the Colorado plains, but inside the little cabin of the Circle B Ranch, Hannah Crawford and her 3 sons had found warmth, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. The morning sun crept through the cabin window, painting gold lines across the rough wooden floor. Hannah woke before dawn, quietly tucking the quilt around her sleeping boys. Their faces looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. She moved softly through the small room, determined to show Mr. Baxter that she was no burden. When she stepped into the main room, Dawson was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in his hand. "You're up early," he said, rising politely. "I wanted to get started," she replied, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Where do you need me most?" Dawson smiled faintly and poured her a cup of coffee. "Mrs. Abernathy usually handles meals and laundry for the ranch hands, but there's more than one woman should handle alone. We've got 12 men in the bunkhouse, plus me. She could use help." Quote, "I can cook, clean, or mend," Hannah said quickly. "Whatever's needed." He nodded. "There's one more thing. Your oldest boy mentioned you used to be a teacher." Hannah blinked. "Yes. I taught school for 3 years in Philadelphia before I married." Dawson leaned back slightly, studying her face. "We lost our school teacher 2 months ago. Married a miner and moved south. There are 8 children around these parts, counting yours, with no lessons since." He took a slow sip of coffee. "I'd pay you $15 a month to teach them, plus room and board here for you and your boys." Hannah stared, unsure she'd heard him right. "That's generous." "You'll be earning every cent," Dawson said simply. "This land needs educated young folks as much as it needs strong backs." She smiled, a real one this time. "Then I'll do it." From that day on, Hannah fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with the soft light of dawn, her boys still rubbing sleep from their eyes as they walked with her to the little schoolhouse Dawson had converted from an old storage shed. She swept the dust from its floor, washed the windows, and filled it with laughter and learning. By midday, she was back at the cabin or helping Mrs. Abernathy with chores, kneading bread, washing clothes in the stream, or mending torn shirts for the ranch hands. Each evening, she gathered her sons around the fire to read from the few books Dawson had lent her. The boys thrived at the Circle B. James, serious and steady, spent hours following the ranch hands, learning to saddle horses and rope fence posts. Samuel became fascinated by the blacksmith, who taught him how to hammer glowing iron into shape. Little William never left Dawson's side, toddling after him through the barns and corrals, chattering endlessly. "Mr. Baxter says horses talk if you listen close," William told her one night. "You just gotta know they're kind of quiet." Hannah smiled softly. "Then you'd best learn their language, son." In the months that followed, the fear that had shadowed her heart began to lift. Dawson was always nearby, but never intrusive. He treated her with respect, and her boys with fatherly patience. She often caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, how his strong hands guided a horse's reins, how he always removed his hat when speaking to women, how the laughter from his men softened when he entered a room. Sometimes, she'd feel his eyes on her too. One evening, after putting the boys to bed, she stepped outside to watch the sunset. The air was cool, the sky glowing orange and pink. She heard the crunch of boots behind her and turned to find Dawson carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Please do," she said, accepting the cup. They sat on the porch steps in silence for a while, watching the sky fade to deep blue. "Your boys are settling in," Dawson said finally. "They are," she replied softly. "I've never seen them so happy." He smiled. "James told me he wants to be a rancher someday." She laughed quietly. "He told me the same thing." "Said you make it look easy." Dawson shook his head. "Ain't easy, just worth it." Quote. They sat quietly again, the evening crickets filling the air with their soft song. Hannah felt peace settle over her, a peace she hadn't known since before her husband's death. "Are you happy here, Mrs. Crawford?" Dawson asked after a while. The question caught her off guard. She looked out toward the pastures where lanterns glowed faintly by the barn. "Yes," she said finally. "More than I ever thought I'd be again." Dawson nodded, satisfied. "Good. That's good." From then on, things between them began to change in ways neither spoke of, but both felt. Dawson found reasons to stop by the schoolhouse, bringing supplies or books he thought might help. On Sundays, he invited Hannah and her boys to dinner at the main house. His men started teasing him gently about it, though never in front of her. Mrs. Abernathy teased too, humming wedding tunes whenever the two were in the same room. Hannah would blush, scolding the older woman, but her heart always fluttered. One crisp autumn afternoon, Hannah and little William were in the meadow picking wildflowers when Dawson rode up from the west pasture. He dismounted and walked over, leading his horse by the reins. "Those are fine blossoms, William," Dawson said, crouching beside them. "They're for Mama's table," the boy said proudly. "Good choice," Dawson said, smiling at Hannah. "Your Mama deserves nice things." William grinned. "Mama says you got the kindest eyes she's ever seen." Hannah froze, her face turning scarlet. "William Crawford!" Dawson chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Did she now?" "Children talk too much," Hannah muttered, gathering flowers faster. Dawson's grin widened. "So you don't think I have kind eyes?" She shot him a quick glance. "They're perfectly fine eyes, Mr. Baxter." "Perfectly fine?" He clutched his chest in mock pain. "You wound me." Hannah tried to keep a straight face, but laughter bubbled up before she could stop it. "You're impossible." "I prefer persistent," he said with a wink. That evening, after the boys were asleep, there came a soft knock at her door. When Hannah opened it, Dawson stood there, holding a small brown package. "May I come in a moment?" he asked quietly. She nodded, stepping aside. He placed the package on the table. "This is for you." Inside was a book bound in soft leather. Tennyson's poems, her favorite. Hannah's breath caught. "Mr. Baxter, it's beautiful." He looked almost shy. "You mentioned him once. I had it sent up from Denver." Her fingers traced the cover gently. "Thank you. This means more than you know." Dawson cleared his throat, his tone turning serious. "Hannah, there's something I need to say." Her heart skipped. "Yes?" He met her eyes. "I've come to care for you and your boys more than I ever expected to care for anyone again. I know you're still grieving. I'm not asking for anything now, only the chance to court you when you're ready." Hannah felt her throat tighten. The ache in her heart, the one she thought would never heal, suddenly eased a little. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything yet," Dawson said softly. "Just know my intentions are honest." After he left, Hannah sat long by the fire, the book open on her lap. Her heart felt warm, full, and frightened all at once. For the first time since Thomas's death, she dared to wonder if love could find her again in this wild, untamed land. Winter came early that year. By November, the hills around the Circle B ranch were white with snow, and smoke curled from every chimney. Life slowed, and the ranch hands worked, bundled in coats and scarves. Hannah took over much of the cooking from Mrs. Abernathy, whose joints ached in the cold. Her boys spent their days sledding on the small slopes near the barn, coming home rosy-cheeked for hot cocoa by the fire. Dawson kept his distance after that evening with the poetry book. True to his word, he gave her space. But there was a new warmth in every glance, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. Sometimes she caught him watching her through the window, his expression soft and thoughtful. Then, in mid-December, sickness swept through the valley. One by one, the ranch hands took to their bunks with fever and chills. Mrs. Abernathy and Hannah tended to them day and night, bringing broth and wiping sweat from flushed faces. When Dawson fell ill, the worry in Hannah's chest turned to fear. She moved him from the main house to her cabin so she could keep him close. The boys stayed with Mrs. Abernathy, and Hannah barely slept. She bathed Dawson's burning forehead with cool cloths, whispered prayers when he tossed and muttered in his fever dreams. On the third night, his fever soared dangerously high. His hand clutched hers weakly, his voice rough and broken. "Don't go, Sarah," he whispered. "Please, don't leave me again." Hannah froze. The name struck her like a stone. She stayed beside him, her voice steady though her heart ached. "Rest easy, Dawson. You're safe." He drifted in and out, haunted by ghosts of the past. She held his hand through it all, refusing to leave him. When dawn came, his fever finally broke. Dawson opened his eyes weakly to find Hannah slumped beside the bed, asleep in her chair. Her hair was loose, her face pale from exhaustion. He reached out and touched a curl that had fallen across her cheek. She stirred, startled, then smiled in relief. "You're awake," she said softly. "The fever's gone." "Thanks to you," he rasped. "Don't thank me. Just rest now." He took a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly. After a long pause, he asked, "Did I say anything while I was out?" Quote. Hannah hesitated, then said quietly, "You mentioned someone named Sarah." Dawson's face grew somber. "Sarah was my wife," he said after a moment. "She died 12 years ago. Influenza, same as this. She was expecting our first child. I was away delivering cattle when it happened." "I'm sorry," Hannah whispered. He nodded slowly. "After that, I buried myself in work. Thought if I built enough fences and raised enough cattle, I'd never have to feel that pain again. But then you came along." His eyes met hers, weary, but full of something new. "You and those boys reminded me that life's still worth living." Hannah reached for his hand, her eyes bright with tears. "You gave us a home when no one else would. I think maybe God meant for our paths to cross." Dawson smiled faintly and closed his eyes. "When I'm back on my feet, there's something I'd like to ask you." "Rest first," she said gently. "There'll be time for talk when you're well." By Christmas Eve, everyone at the Circle B had recovered. Dawson was still thin and pale, but strong enough to host the annual Christmas gathering. The main house glowed with lanterns and pine garlands. A tall tree stood in the corner, covered in ribbons and dried berries. The air smelled of roasted meat and cinnamon bread. Hannah and her boys came early to help Mrs. Abernathy set the tables. The boys raced through the house, excited to see the gifts under the tree. When the meal was done and laughter filled the room, Dawson brought out 3 small packages. "For the young men of the house," he said with a grin. Inside each box was a hand-carved saddle, sized perfectly for small ponies. James gaped. "You mean we get to ride?" "Every cowboy should have a horse of his own," Dawson said, chuckling as all 3 boys threw their arms around him. Later, As the guests began to leave and the fire burned low, Dawson approached Hannah with a small velvet box. "Merry Christmas," he said quietly. Inside was a silver locket. On one side was a painted portrait of her 3 sons. The other side was empty. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "The empty side's for whatever comes next," Dawson said. "Whatever future you choose." Her eyes met his, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then Dawson took her hand. "Walk with me a minute?" They stepped out onto the porch. Snow covered the ground in a soft white blanket, and the stars glittered above. Their breath hung in the cold air. "Hannah," he began, his voice low and steady, "when you came to Willow Creek, you were tired and scared, but you stood tall. I saw your courage that first day. Since then, I've come to love you and your boys as if they were my own." Quote. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold band. "I know you've known loss, so have I, but I want to build something new with you. Will you be my wife?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him, the man who had given her family a second chance, who had asked for nothing but honesty and hope. "When I came here, I was lost," she said softly. "You gave us shelter, kindness, and love." "Yes, Dawson Baxter. I'll marry you." He smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Then welcome home, Hannah," he said, drawing her close. They were married on New Year's Day, 1880, in the ranch's main room. The whole town came to celebrate. Her sons stood proudly beside her, presenting rings they had helped the blacksmith make from old horseshoe nails, rough but full of meaning. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves in the fields, foals in the corral, and the promise of another child on the way. The boys thrived under Dawson's care, and laughter filled every corner of the house. One warm evening, Hannah sat on the porch watching her sons chase the ranch dogs through the tall grass. Dawson joined her, taking her hand in his. "Happy?" he asked softly. She smiled, placing his hand over her stomach. "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her temple, the sunset lighting the world in gold. "You know," he said, "if your husband's brother hadn't turned you away, you might never have come to Willow Creek." Hannah looked at him, eyes full of gratitude. "Then I owe that man thanks. His rejection led us home." Dawson pulled her close, his voice gentle. "From the day I met you, I told you, you're home now. I didn't know then that you'd be the one to make this place feel like home for me, too." The wind carried the soft sound of the boys, laughter across the fields, and Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, her heart full. Here, in the wide and wild West, surrounded by love, she had found more than shelter. She had found a home that would last forever.